The dust from the street clung to Sophie Kimball's worn boots as she stood at the corner of Coolidge's Main Street in Arizona Territory, her stomach growling so loudly she thought surely everyone passing by could hear it. It was late August in 1885, and the heat pressed down on her like a heavy wool blanket, making the charcoal smudges on her fingers run with sweat as she clutched a portfolio of drawings she hoped might feed her for another day or two. She had been in Coolidge for 3 weeks now, ever since the stagecoach driver had let her off with nothing but a canvas bag and the clothes on her back. The money her father had left her before he died had run out somewhere between Kansas and New Mexico, spent on passage west and food that barely kept her alive. At 22 years old, she had expected to find work as a teacher or perhaps a seamstress. But Coolidge was a small ranching town with few opportunities for a woman alone. The school already had a teacher, and the seamstress who ran the dress shop had looked at Sophie's trembling hands and turned her away, saying she needed someone with steadier nerves. But Sophie could draw. She had been drawing since she was a child, sketching the horses on her father's small farm in Ohio, capturing the way light fell through the barn doors, the expressions on people's faces as they went about their daily lives. Her father had encouraged it, saying she had a gift, though her mother had called it foolishness and a waste of time better spent on practical skills. After both her parents died within a year of each other, one from fever and one from a heart that simply gave out from grief, Sophie had sold everything and headed west with dreams of starting fresh somewhere new. Those dreams felt very far away now as she spread her drawings on a wooden crate she had borrowed from behind the general store. She had sketches of the desert landscape, the mountains in the distance, portraits of people she had observed from afar, and detailed studies of horses and cattle. A few townspeople had stopped to look over the past weeks, and she had managed to sell 3 small drawings for enough money to buy bread and a bit of cheese. But it was never enough, and she was always hungry. The boarding house where she had been staying had told her yesterday that if she could not pay by the end of the week, she would have to leave. Mrs. Patterson, the landlady, had been kind enough, but she had a business to run and could not afford charity. Sophie had 1 day left to come up with the money, or she would be sleeping in the stable behind the saloon if they would even let her. She arranged her drawings carefully, making sure each one could be seen clearly. A woman walked past with her children, glancing briefly at the artwork but not stopping. A cowboy rode by on a dusty horse, tipping his hat but continuing on his way. Sophie tried to smile at each passerby, but her face felt tight with worry and exhaustion. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, and even then, it had only been a small piece of bread that the baker's wife had given her out of pity. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when she heard the sound of boots approaching. She looked up to see a tall man standing before her display, his shadow falling across the drawings. He was broad-shouldered and sun-bronzed, with dark hair that showed beneath his worn hat and eyes the color of the sky just before a storm. His clothes marked him as a rancher, the kind of man who worked his own land rather than hiring others to do it for him. There was dust on his boots and his shirt, and his hands looked strong and capable. "Did you make these?" he asked, his voice deep and direct. "Yes, sir," Sophie said, straightening her spine despite her exhaustion. "I did. They are for sale if you are interested. Very reasonable prices." He crouched down to get a better look, his eyes moving slowly across each drawing. Sophie watched him nervously, trying to read his expression but finding it difficult. His face was weathered and serious, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time squinting into the sun. He picked up a drawing she had done of a horse standing in a creek, the water rippling around its legs. "How much for this one?" he asked. $2, Sophie said quickly, though her heart hammered in her chest. It was perhaps more than she should ask, but she desperately needed the money. He nodded and set it aside, then picked up another drawing, this one of the mountains at sunrise. "And this, $2 as well." He set it with the first one and continued examining her work. Sophie's mouth went dry as she watched him select drawing after drawing, creating a stack that grew larger by the minute. He picked up a portrait she had done of an elderly Mexican woman she had seen at the market, capturing the wisdom and weariness in her eyes. He studied it for a long moment before adding it to his pile. "These are all very good," he said, looking up at her for the first time since he had started examining her work. "You have real talent." "Thank you," Sophie managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She could hardly believe what was happening. "How much for all of them?" he asked, gesturing to every drawing she had displayed. Sophie stared at him, certain she had misheard. "All of them? Every single one?" Her mind raced as she tried to calculate. She had 23 drawings displayed, and if each one sold for $2, that would be $46. It was more money than she had seen in months, enough to pay her boarding house debt and buy food and supplies for weeks. $46, she said, her voice shaking. "For all 23. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, counting out the bills without hesitation. Sophie watched in amazement as he handed her the money, the paper crisp and real in her trembling hands. "You have more?" he asked, gathering up the drawings carefully. "More drawings? I have a few back at my room, but they are not as polished as these. I have been working on them when I have time and materials." "I would like to see them," he said, "and I have a proposition for you if you are willing to hear it." Sophie clutched the money to her chest, afraid that if she moved too quickly this would all turn out to be a dream. "What kind of proposition?" "I am Hank Kincaid. I own a ranch about 5 miles north of here. It is a good-sized spread, been in my family for 15 years now. I have been looking for someone to document the ranch, the land, the cattle, the horses. Someone who can capture what it looks like now before things change. I have been thinking about it for a while, but I had not found the right person." He paused, studying her face. "Until now." "You want to commission me?" Sophie asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I want to hire you," Hank said. "Not just for 1 or 2 drawings, but for as long as it takes to do the job right. Months, maybe longer. I can provide room and board at the ranch house. My sister and her husband live there too, so it would be proper. And I would pay you a fair wage for your work." Sophie's legs felt weak, and she had to brace herself against the wooden crate to keep from swaying. Food, shelter, and payment for doing the one thing she loved most in the world. It seemed impossible, too good to be true. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." "I know your work," Hank said simply. "That is enough. These drawings show me that you see things the way they really are, not just how they appear on the surface. That is what I need. My father built this ranch from nothing, and he died 2 years ago without ever seeing it properly documented. I want to honor his memory by having a record of what he created, what he left behind." There was something in his voice when he mentioned his father, a roughness that suggested the loss was still raw. Sophie understood that kind of pain. She had carried it with her since her own parents died, a weight that never quite lifted but simply became part of who you were. "I accept," she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. "I would be honored to work for you, Mr. Kincaid." "Hank," he corrected. "If we are going to be working together, we should dispense with formalities. What is your name?" "Sophie Kimball." "Well, Miss Kimball, when can you be ready to leave? I have business in town tomorrow morning, but I could take you out to the ranch tomorrow afternoon if that suits you." "That would be perfect," Sophie said. "I just need to settle my account at the boarding house and gather my belongings." "It will not take long, I don't have much." "Tomorrow afternoon then," Hank said, tipping his hat to her. "I will meet you at the boarding house at 2 o'clock, Mrs. Patterson's place, correct?" "Yes, that is where I have been staying. How did you know?" "It is a small town," Hank said with the hint of a smile. "Word travels. I will see you tomorrow, Miss Kimball." He walked away carrying her drawings, and Sophie stood frozen in place for several long moments, staring at the money in her hands and trying to convince herself that this had really happened. When she finally moved, her first stop was the general store, where she bought bread and cheese and apples, more food than she could eat in one sitting. She sat on the steps of the store and ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling strength return to her body with each mouthful. That night, she lay in her narrow bed at the boarding house, too excited to sleep. She had paid Mrs. Patterson what she owed and informed her that she would be leaving tomorrow. The landlady had looked pleased for her, saying she had hoped something good would come Sophie's way. Now, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, Sophie allowed herself to imagine what life at the ranch might be like. She would have a place to stay, food to eat, and the freedom to draw every day. It was more than she had dared to hope for. But there was something else too, something she barely wanted to acknowledge even to herself. When Hank Kincaid had looked at her drawings, there had been genuine appreciation in his eyes, a respect for her work that she had rarely encountered. And when he had spoken about his father and the ranch, she had sensed a depth of feeling that suggested there was more to this stern-faced rancher than he showed the world. She found herself curious about him, wanting to know more about the man who had just changed her life. The next morning passed slowly. Sophie packed her few belongings into her canvas bag and made sure her remaining drawings were carefully protected. She had 5 more sketches in various stages of completion, and she wrapped them in cloth to keep them safe during the journey. She washed her face and brushed her hair, trying to make herself look presentable. Her dress was worn and patched in places, but it was clean, and it was the best she had. At 2 o'clock exactly, she heard a wagon pull up outside the boarding house. She grabbed her bag and hurried downstairs to find Hank waiting, sitting atop a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 horses. He climbed down when he saw her and took her bag, placing it in the back of the wagon with a gentleness that surprised her. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Sophie confirmed, and he helped her up onto the wagon seat. The ride out to the ranch took them through open desert country that gradually gave way to grassland dotted with cattle. Hank pointed out landmarks as they went, explaining the boundaries of his property and showing her where the best water sources were located. He spoke with obvious pride about the land, and Sophie found herself relaxing in his presence. There was something solid and dependable about him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe. "Tell me about your family," Sophie said after a while, wanting to fill the comfortable silence with conversation. "You mentioned your sister lives at the ranch." "Hannah and her husband Thomas," Hank said, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "They have been with me for 3 years now since they got married. Thomas helps run the ranch and Hannah manages the house. They have a little girl, Clara, who just turned 2. You will like them. Hannah has been after me to hire help for a long time, though I don't think this is quite what she had in mind." "What do you mean?" "She thought I needed a cook or a housekeeper," Hank said, and there was amusement in his voice now. "She is going to be very curious when I show up with an artist." "Will she mind?" Sophie asked, suddenly worried. "Not at all. Hannah is the most welcoming person you will ever meet. She is going to be thrilled to have another woman around, especially one close to her age." She gets lonely out at the ranch sometimes, with just Thomas and me and the ranch hands for company." They crested a rise, and suddenly the ranch spread out before them. The main house was larger than Sophie had expected, a solid structure of wood and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. There were several outbuildings, including a barn, a stable, and what looked like a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. Corrals held horses and cattle, and beyond them stretched seemingly endless acres of grazing land. "It is beautiful," Sophie said, and she meant it. "My father thought so too," Hank said quietly. "He came out here in 1870 with nothing but determination and a dream. Built this place from the ground up. Lost my mother to fever the second year, but he kept going. Said she would have wanted him to see it through." "I am sorry about your mother," Sophie said. "And your father. It must have been hard to lose them both." "It was, still is some days." Hank glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the horses. "Hannah told me it gets easier with time, but I am not sure I believe her. Some losses just become part of who you are." "Yes," Sophie said softly, thinking of her own parents. "I understand that." He looked at her again, and this time his gaze lingered, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time. There was recognition in his eyes, an acknowledgement of shared grief that needed no words. Then he turned back to the road, guiding the wagon down toward the house. A woman emerged onto the porch as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She was pretty, with the same dark hair as Hank but softer features and a quick smile. A small child clung to her skirts, peeking out shyly at the approaching wagon. "Hank," Hannah called. "You are back earlier than I expected. Who is this?" "This is Miss Sophie Kimball," Hank said, climbing down from the wagon. "She is going to be staying with us for a while. She is an artist, and I have commissioned her to document the ranch." Hannah's eyebrows rose in surprise, but her smile widened. "An artist? How wonderful! Please come in, Miss Kimball. You must be tired from the journey." "Please call me Sophie," Sophie said, accepting Hank's hand as he helped her down from the wagon. "And thank you for welcoming me into your home." "Our home is your home for as long as you need it," Hannah said warmly, and Sophie felt tears prick at her eyes at the genuine kindness in the other woman's voice. It had been so long since anyone had welcomed her anywhere. The interior of the house was comfortable and well kept, with sturdy furniture and curtains at the windows. Hannah showed Sophie to a small bedroom on the second floor that looked out over the corrals and the land beyond. There was a bed with a real quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a small desk beneath the window. "I hope this will be suitable," Hannah said. "I know it is not fancy, but it is clean and private." "It is perfect," Sophie said, setting her bag down on the bed. "More than perfect." "I cannot thank you enough." "No need for thanks," Hannah said. "I am just glad Hank finally took my advice about getting help, even if this is not quite what I had in mind." She smiled conspiratorially. "Though between you and me, I think this is much more interesting than hiring another cook." Sophie laughed, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. She had been so worried about imposing, about being a burden, but Hannah's easy manner made her feel genuinely welcome. "Come down when you are settled," Hannah said from the doorway. "Supper will be ready in about an hour, and you can meet Thomas and the ranch hands. They are a rough bunch, but they have good hearts." After Hannah left, Sophie unpacked her few belongings and washed her face at the basin. She stood at the window for a long time, watching the sun paint the landscape in shades of gold and amber as it moved toward the horizon. In the corral below, Hank was working with a young horse, his movements patient and sure. She found herself watching him, noting the way he moved, the care he took with the animal. There was something about him that drew her attention, though she could not quite name what it was. Supper that evening was a lively affair. Thomas was a friendly man with an easy laugh, and the four ranch hands who ate with them were respectful and curious about the new addition to the household. Sophie found herself answering questions about where she was from and how she had learned to draw, and for the first time in months, she felt like she was part of something, like she belonged somewhere. Hank said little during the meal, but Sophie noticed that he watched her with those storm-colored eyes, his expression thoughtful. When the meal was finished and the ranch hands had returned to the bunkhouse, he approached her as she helped Hannah clear the table. "I thought we could start tomorrow morning if you are ready," he said. "I can show you around the ranch, let you get a feel for the place. Then you can decide what you want to draw first." "That sounds wonderful," Sophie said. "What time?" "Right after breakfast." "Sunrise is at 6, so we eat at 6:30. That gives us the whole day to work with the best light. I will be ready." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Sophie, thank you for agreeing to do this. It means more to me than you probably realize." Before she could respond, he was gone, his boots heavy on the wooden floor as he headed outside. Hannah appeared at her elbow, a knowing look on her face. "My brother is a man of few words," she said, "but when he speaks, he means what he says. If he told you this is important to him, then it truly is." That night, Sophie lay in her comfortable bed and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Horses whinnied softly in the stable, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. She thought about the strange turn her life had taken, how just yesterday she had been desperate and starving, and now she was here, safe and fed and employed. More than that, she was excited about her work for the first time in months. She had the chance to create something meaningful, to use her art for a purpose beyond mere survival. And there was Hank Kincaid, the serious rancher with the storm-cloud eyes and the rare smile. She barely knew him, but something about him made her want to know more. Something about the way he had looked at her drawings, the respect in his voice when he had offered her this opportunity, the grief she had glimpsed when he spoke of his father. She fell asleep thinking about what tomorrow would bring, her sketchbook waiting on the desk by the window. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Sophie was awake before the sun rose. She dressed carefully in her work dress, the one that was most worn and could withstand a day of outdoor activity. She braided her hair back from her face and gathered her drawing supplies into a leather satchel that Hank had provided the night before. It was a good satchel, expensive and well-made, and she wondered if he had bought it just for her, or if he had owned it for some other purpose. Breakfast was a hearty meal of eggs and bacon and fresh bread, and Sophie ate with an appetite that still surprised her after so many weeks of near starvation. Clara sat in a high chair next to Hannah, babbling happily and throwing bits of food on the floor for the ranch dog to catch. The domestic scene filled Sophie with unexpected warmth, and she realized how much she had missed being part of a family, even if this one was not her own. After breakfast, Hank was waiting for her by the corral. He had 2 horses saddled and ready, and Sophie felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She could ride, but it had been years since she had been on a horse, and she hoped she would not embarrass herself. "The brown mare is gentle," Hank said, reading her expression accurately. "Her name is Copper, and she will take good care of you. We will ride out to the east pasture first. The cattle are grazing there right now, and I thought you might want to sketch them in their natural setting." Sophie approached the mare and stroked her soft nose, murmuring a greeting. The horse nickered softly in response, and Sophie felt some of her nervousness fade. With Hank's help, she mounted, settling herself in the saddle and adjusting her skirts as modestly as possible. They rode out as the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting everything in brilliant morning light. Hank pointed out features of the landscape as they went, explaining the history of different areas of the ranch. He showed her where his father had built the first rough cabin when he arrived, now just a tumble of stones and rotting wood. He pointed to a grove of cottonwood trees where there was a spring that never ran dry, even in the hottest summers. My father used to say that water was the reason he chose this land, Hank said as they paused to let the horses drink. Everything else can be built or bought, but water you have to find. He knew this land would support cattle as long as we had reliable water sources. He sounds like he was a wise man, Sophie said. He was. Tough as leather and twice as stubborn, but wise. Hank's expression softened with memory. He taught me everything I know about ranching. About life, really. He used to say that a man's character is measured by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. That is why I pay my ranch hands fair wages and treat them with respect. That is why when I saw you in town trying to sell your drawings for bread, I wanted to help. Sophie felt heat rise in her cheeks. So you bought my drawings out of charity? No, Hank said firmly, meeting her eyes directly. I bought them because they were good, because they were worth far more than you were asking. The fact that you needed the money was secondary. I would have bought them regardless. But you did know I needed help, Sophie said quietly. Yes, Hank admitted. Mrs. Patterson mentioned to Hannah that you were struggling. I won't lie to you, Sophie. When I saw your work, I saw an opportunity to help someone who deserved it while also getting something I genuinely wanted. There is no shame in accepting help when you need it, just as there is no shame in offering it when you can. Sophie considered this, turning his words over in her mind. She had been raised to be independent, to take care of herself, but pride could be a cold companion when you were hungry and alone. Hank had given her an opportunity to work for what she received, to maintain her dignity while accepting the help she desperately needed. There was kindness in that and wisdom too. Thank you, she said simply, for understanding, for giving me this chance. You are welcome, Hank said. Now shall we get to work? Those cattle are not going to draw themselves. They spent the morning in the east pasture, and Sophie lost herself in her work the way she always did when she was truly engaged. She sketched the cattle grazing, capturing the way they moved across the landscape. She drew individual animals in detail, noting the different conformations and markings. She sketched Hank on his horse, watching over his herd, though she did not show him that particular drawing. Something about the way he sat his horse, the line of his shoulders against the sky, had called out to be captured. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, Hank suggested they break for lunch. He had brought food in his saddlebags, and they sat in the shade of a rock outcropping while the horses rested. Hannah had packed cold chicken and bread and fruit, and they ate in companionable silence, watching hawks circle overhead. May I see what you have done so far? Hank asked when they had finished eating. Sophie hesitated, then handed him her sketchbook. She always felt vulnerable sharing her work in progress, but this was what he was paying her for. She needed to trust that he would respect her artistic process. Hank studied each page carefully, his expression serious and focused. When he reached the sketch she had done of him on his horse, he paused for a long moment. Sophie held her breath, wondering if he would be angry that she had drawn him without permission. "This is how you see me?" he asked finally, his voice strange. "That is how you look," Sophie said. "Is it wrong?" "No, it is right. Too right, maybe. You captured something I did not know showed." He looked up from the sketchbook, his eyes searching her face. "You really do see things others miss, don't you?" "I just draw what I see," Sophie said, though her heart was beating faster than usual. There was something intense in the way he was looking at her, something that made her feel exposed and understood all at once. "What do you see when you look at me?" Hank asked, and the question seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. Sophie considered carefully before answering. "I see someone who carries responsibility heavily. Someone who loved his father very much and is trying to honor his memory. Someone who is kind but tries to hide it behind sternness. Someone who is lonely, maybe, but who doesn't know how to let people close." Hank stared at her, and for a moment she thought she had gone too far, been too honest. But then he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "You see too much," he said, but there was no anger in his voice. "Has anyone ever told you that? My father used to say I had eyes that saw into people's souls," Sophie admitted. "My mother said it was why I would never find a husband, that men don't like women who see them too clearly." "Your mother was wrong," Hank said. "Any man worth having would appreciate being truly seen." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Sophie did not quite understand but felt all the way through her body. Then Hank stood, breaking the spell, and offered her his hand to help her up. "We should head back," he said. "You have done good work today, and there will be plenty more time to continue." They rode back to the ranch house in the golden afternoon light, and Sophie found her mind returning again and again to the strange moment they had shared by the rock outcropping. She had been honest with him in a way she rarely was with anyone, and instead of being put off, he had seemed to appreciate it. More than that, he had smiled at her with genuine warmth, and she realized she wanted to see that smile again. Over the following weeks, Sophie fell into a comfortable routine at the ranch. She spent her mornings working with Hank, going to different parts of the property and documenting what she saw. She sketched the landscape in different lights and weather conditions. She drew the ranch buildings in careful detail, capturing the way they had been constructed and the wear they showed from years of use. She sketched the ranch hands at work, the horses in the corral, the cattle in various pastures. But increasingly, she found herself drawing Hank. She could not seem to help herself. There was something about him that fascinated her as an artist and as a woman. The way he moved, economical and sure. The way his face changed when he smiled, which he was doing more often these days. The concentration in his eyes when he was working with a horse or making decisions about the ranch. She filled pages with studies of him, most of which she kept private. Hank, for his part, seemed to enjoy having her around. He talked more than he apparently used to, sharing stories about his father and the early days of the ranch. He asked her about her own life, her childhood in Ohio, her parents, her decision to come west. He listened when she spoke, really listened, in a way that made her feel like her words mattered. Hannah noticed, of course. She made knowing comments about how much time Hank was spending away from his other duties, about how he smiled more these days. Thomas teased him good-naturedly, saying he had never seen his brother-in-law so eager to show someone around the ranch. Hank brushed off their comments, but Sophie noticed that his ears reddened when they spoke, a telltale sign that he was not as unaffected as he pretended to be. Sophie tried not to read too much into it. She was here to work, to document the ranch, not to develop feelings for her employer. But feelings did not ask permission. She was learning. They grew whether you wanted them to or not, taking root in quiet moments and shared glances, in conversations that went deeper than they should have, in the warmth that spread through her chest every time Hank smiled at her. One evening in late September, after nearly a month at the ranch, Sophie was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Hank joined her. He had a bottle and 2 glasses, and he poured them each a measure of whiskey before settling into the chair beside her. "To your work," he said, raising his glass. "Hannah told me you finished a series of drawings of the house today. I would like to see them." "Tomorrow," Sophie said, sipping the whiskey and feeling it burn pleasantly down her throat. tonight I just want to enjoy this view." "Fair enough," Hank said, and they sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to amber to deep purple. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said eventually. "Of course. Why did you never marry?" "Hannah mentioned that you have had plenty of opportunities, but you always said no." Hank was quiet for so long that Sophie thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "After my mother died, I saw what it did to my father. He loved her so much that losing her nearly destroyed him. The only thing that kept him going was his responsibility to Hannah and me, and to this ranch. I watched him carry that grief for the rest of his life, and I told myself I would never let myself care for someone that much. It seemed safer to be alone. But you must have been lonely," Sophie said softly. "I was," Hank admitted. "I am. But loneliness seemed preferable to the kind of pain my father endured." He turned to look at her, his expression serious in the fading light. "At least, that's what I thought until recently." "What changed?" Sophie asked, though her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You did," Hank said simply. "Or maybe you didn't change anything. Maybe you just showed me what I have been missing. These past weeks, having you here, talking with you, sharing the ranch with you, it has made me realize that being alone is not the same as being safe. It is just another kind of pain, slower but just as deep." Sophie set down her glass with shaking hands. "Hank, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I am not asking you for anything. I just needed you to know. You see me so clearly in your drawings. I wanted you to see this too." He stood and went inside, leaving Sophie alone on the porch with her whirling thoughts and racing heart. She sat there long after the stars came out, trying to understand what had just happened and what it meant. Hank had all but told her he had feelings for her, but he had not asked for anything in return. He had simply been honest, the way she had been honest with him that day by the rock outcropping. She thought about her own feelings, the ones she had been trying to ignore. The truth was that she had fallen for Hank Kincaid somewhere between that first day in Coolidge, when he had bought all her drawings, and tonight on this porch. She had fallen for his quiet strength and his rare smiles, for the way he talked about his father and his land, for his kindness that he tried to hide, for the loneliness in him that matched her own. But what could come of it? She was an employee, dependent on him for her livelihood. The power imbalance alone made any romantic entanglement complicated. And yet, when she thought about leaving this ranch, about finishing her commission and moving on, her heart clenched with something very much like grief. That night, she could not sleep. She lit the lamp on her desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. She began to draw from memory, not the ranch or the landscape, but Hank. She drew him as she had seen him on the porch tonight, his face shadowed and vulnerable, his eyes holding a question he had not quite asked. She drew him until her hand cramped, until the lamp oil ran low, until she had captured every detail she could remember. When she finally climbed into bed as the first light of dawn was breaking, she knew that something had shifted between them. The question was whether she had the courage to acknowledge it, and what she would do if she did. The next few days were awkward. Hank seemed to regret his honesty, pulling back into his old reserve. He still took Sophie out to different parts of the ranch for her work, but he spoke less, and the easy companionship they had developed felt strained. Sophie wanted to say something to bridge the gap, but she did not know what or how. Hannah noticed the tension and cornered Sophie in the kitchen one afternoon while they were baking bread. "What happened between you and my brother?" she asked bluntly. "I am not sure," Sophie said, kneading dough with more force than necessary. "He said something the other night, and now everything feels different." "What did he say?" Sophie hesitated, not sure if it was her place to share, but she needed advice, and Hannah knew her brother better than anyone. He told me that I had made him realize being alone is just another kind of pain. He said I changed things for him. Hannah's face lit up with delight. Oh, that stubborn man. He finally admitted it. Admitted what? That he has feelings for you. Sophie, it has been obvious for weeks. The way he looks at you, the way he talks about your work, the way he finds excuses to spend time with you. I am amazed he finally said something. But now he is acting strange, like he wishes he had not said anything. That is because he is scared, Hannah said, shaping her dough into a loaf. Hank has spent years convincing himself that loving someone is too risky, too painful. Now he has gone and developed feelings anyway, and he doesn't know what to do with them. He is probably worried that he has made things uncomfortable for you, that you will want to leave. I don't want to leave, Sophie said quietly. That is what frightens me. I have only been here a month, but this place feels more like home than anywhere I have been since my parents died. And Hank, he has become important to me, more important than he probably should be. Hannah stopped working and looked at Sophie with kind eyes. Do you have feelings for him too? Yes, Sophie admitted, the word feeling like both a relief and a terror. I do, but I work for him. I depend on him. How can anything proper come of this? Sophie, you are not some helpless girl with no options. You have a skill, a real talent that people value. Hank hired you because of that talent, not out of charity. Yes, he has helped you, but you have also given him something valuable in return. Your work is going to preserve his father's legacy, and that means more to him than you probably realize. You are equals in the ways that matter. But what if I am wrong about his feelings? What if I say something and ruin everything? What if you don't say something and spend the rest of your life wondering? Hannah countered. Look, I know my brother. He would never have said what he said if he did not mean it. He is just waiting for you to tell him whether his feelings are welcomed or whether he has made a terrible mistake. Put him out of his misery, Sophie. Tell him the truth. That evening, Sophie asked Hank if she could speak with him privately. He looked wary but agreed, and they walked out toward the corrals as the sun was setting. Sophie's heart was pounding so hard she felt dizzy, but she knew Hannah was right. She could not let fear keep her from being honest. I have been thinking about what you said the other night, Sophie began, her voice steadier than she felt. About how I changed things for you, about loneliness being its own kind of pain. Hank stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression guarded. Sophie, if I made you uncomfortable, I apologize. I should not have said those things. You work for me and it was inappropriate. No, Sophie interrupted. Let me finish, please. He nodded, waiting. I came to Coolidge with nothing, Sophie said. I was starving and desperate, and I thought I was going to end up sleeping in the street. Then you appeared and bought all my drawings, and you gave me this opportunity. You gave me hope, but it is more than that. These past weeks, working with you, talking with you, being part of this place, it has been the happiest I have been since before my parents died. She took a breath, gathering her courage. You said I changed things for you. Well, you changed things for me too. You made me remember what it feels like to be seen, to be valued for who I am and what I can do. You made me remember what it feels like to belong somewhere. And yes, you made me feel things I probably should not feel for my employer. Hank's eyes widened slightly, but he did not speak, letting her continue. I understand if this is complicated, if my feelings are unwelcome. I can finish my work here and then leave if that is what you prefer. But I needed you to know that you are not alone in what you are feeling. Whatever this is between us, it goes both ways. For a long moment, Hank just stared at her, his face unreadable in the dying light. Then he closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and took her hands in his. Sophie Kimball, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I have been in agony for days thinking I had ruined everything, that I had frightened you or made you want to leave. You have no idea what it means to hear you say that." "So what do we do now?" Sophie asked, her hands trembling in his. "I would very much like to court you properly, if you will allow it. I know the circumstances are unusual, but I don't care. I have spent too many years alone because I was afraid. I don't want to be afraid anymore." "I don't want you to be afraid either," Sophie said. And then she was in his arms, and he was holding her like she was something precious. And she felt tears running down her cheeks, though she was not sure if they were from happiness or relief, or some combination of both. They stood there as the stars came out, holding each other, and Sophie felt something settle in her chest that she had not even realized was unsettled. This was right. This felt like home. Over the following weeks, Hank courted Sophie with a determination that would have been amusing if it had not been so touching. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow beyond the corrals. He made sure she had the finest quality drawing supplies, ordering them from a catalog and having them delivered by special freight. He took her on long rides across the ranch, showing her places he had loved since childhood, sharing memories and dreams. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Hank told her about growing up on the ranch, about the hard years when they almost lost everything to drought, about the pride he felt watching the place grow and prosper. Sophie told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her father teaching her to draw while they sat in the barn, about her mother's disapproval and her decision to come west after her parents died. Hannah and Thomas watched their courtship with obvious delight. Hannah made sure to give them time alone together while still maintaining the propriety necessary for Sophie's reputation. The ranch hands grew accustomed to seeing the boss and the artist riding out together, and they approved of the match. Hank was happier than they had seen him in years, and they liked Sophie for her friendly manner and genuine interest in their lives. Sophie continued her work documenting the ranch, but now it felt different. She was not just creating a record for Hank's father's legacy. She was capturing a place she had come to love, a place she hoped would be her home forever. She drew with new passion and purpose, and her work showed it. The drawings were exceptional, full of life and feeling and detail. One evening in late October, Hank took Sophie back to the spot where they had shared lunch that first day, where she had drawn him on his horse, and he had asked what she saw when she looked at him. The cottonwoods had turned gold, and the evening light made everything look like it was painted in honey. "I brought you here because this is where I first realized what was happening to me," Hank said as they sat on the rocks, watching the sun descend. "This is where I understood that I was falling in love with you." Sophie's breath caught. They had not spoken the word love yet, though it had been present between them for weeks, growing stronger every day. "You don't have to say anything back," Hank continued quickly. "I just needed to tell you. I love you, Sophie. I love your talent and your kindness and your honesty. I love the way you see the world, the way you captured my father's ranch in your drawings. I love the way you make me laugh and the way you understand my silences. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small but beautiful sapphire. "This was my mother's ring," he said. "My father gave it to her when they got married, and she wore it until the day she died. I know it is not fancy, but it would mean the world to me if you would wear it. Sophie Kimball, will you marry me?" Sophie looked at the ring, then at Hank's face, open and vulnerable in a way she knew was rare for him. She thought about the girl she had been just a few months ago, standing on a street corner in Coolidge trying to sell her drawings for bread money. She thought about how much had changed, how far she had come. But most of all, she thought about the man before her, the man she had come to love with her whole heart. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you, Hank Kincaid. I love you too. I think I have loved you since that first day when you looked at my drawings and really saw them, really saw me. Yes." Hank slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and then he kissed her for the first time, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Sophie kissed him back, feeling like she was finally, truly home. They were married in November, in the little church in Coolidge with Hannah and Thomas standing up for them. Sophie wore a new dress that Hannah had helped her make, cream-colored with lace at the collar and cuffs. Hank wore his best suit, and he could not stop smiling the entire day. The whole town turned out for the wedding, curious about the artist and the rancher, and they celebrated with a meal at the ranch house that Hannah and the neighboring women had spent days preparing. That night, in the room that was now theirs to share, Hank held Sophie close and told her again that he loved her. "I never thought I would be this happy," he said, his voice full of wonder. "I spent so long protecting myself from feeling too much, and now I feel everything, and it is terrifying and wonderful at the same time." "I know," Sophie said, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingers. "I feel the same way. After my parents died, I thought I would always be alone. I thought that was just how my life would be. But then I found you, or you found me, and everything changed." "We found each other," Hank said, and he kissed her again, and Sophie felt complete in a way she had never felt before. Sophie continued her work on the ranch after they married, though now she was documenting it as a co-owner rather than an employee. She completed hundreds of drawings over the following months, creating a comprehensive record of the ranch's buildings, land, cattle, and horses. She drew the seasonal changes, the way snow transformed the landscape in winter, the explosion of wildflowers in spring, the golden heat of summer. But she also expanded her artistic horizons. She started taking commissions from other ranchers in the area who had seen her work and wanted similar documentation of their own properties. She sold drawings to travelers passing through Coolidge, capturing the romance of the frontier for people back east. Her work became sought after, and she found herself earning good money doing what she loved. Hank supported her completely, proud of her talent and her success. He helped her set up a proper studio in one of the ranch's outbuildings, with good light and plenty of space. He never suggested that she should give up her work now that she was married and provided for. He understood that her art was part of who she was, and he loved all of her. In the spring of 1886, Sophie discovered she was pregnant. She told Hank one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Hank's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, wonder, fear. "A baby, are you certain?" "I am certain. The doctor confirmed it yesterday in town. I am due in late September, around the time we first met a year ago." "A baby," Hank repeated, and then he was on his feet, pulling Sophie up and spinning her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to be parents. Hannah is going to lose her mind with excitement, and Thomas and little Clara will have a cousin." Sophie laughed too, though she made him put her down, claiming she felt dizzy. They held each other as the stars came out, talking about names and nurseries and all the changes a baby would bring. "Are you scared?" Sophie asked. "Terrified," Hank admitted. "But also more excited than I have ever been about anything. We are going to have a family, Sophie. Our family. A year ago I was alone and convinced that was how I would always be. Now I have you, and soon we will have a child. It is more than I ever let myself hope for." "I am scared too," Sophie said. "But I am also happy. So happy, Hank. You have given me everything I ever wanted, even things I didn't know I wanted until I found them." The pregnancy was not easy. Sophie suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and Hank was beside himself with worry. Hannah helped as much as she could, bringing remedies and keeping Sophie company during the long days when all she could do was rest. Hank refused to let her work too hard, insisting she take breaks and put her feet up, even though Sophie protested that she was pregnant, not dying. As her belly grew, Sophie found she had to adapt her working methods. She could no longer ride out across the ranch as easily as she once had, so she focused on drawings she could do closer to home. She sketched the ranch house and outbuildings in meticulous detail. She drew portraits of the ranch hands and neighboring families. She created a series of drawings of Hannah and Thomas and little Clara, capturing the family dynamics that would soon expand to include her own child. And she drew Hank constantly, documenting the changes in him as he prepared for fatherhood, the excitement and fear that warred in his expression, the careful way he had started building a cradle in the evenings, his large hands working the wood with unexpected delicacy, the way he talked to her belly when he thought she was asleep, telling their unborn child about the ranch and promising to be the best father he could be. In late September, as promised, Sophie went into labor. It was a long and difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next morning. Hank paced outside the bedroom door, nearly driven mad by the sounds of Sophie's pain and his inability to help. Hannah stayed with Sophie the entire time, along with the doctor who had come from Coolidge. Thomas had to physically restrain Hank at one point when he tried to force his way into the room. Finally, just as the sun was fully up, they heard the thin, reedy cry of a newborn. The doctor emerged a few minutes later, looking tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Hank. You have a son. A healthy boy with a good set of lungs on him, and your wife is doing well, tired but fine. You can go in now." Hank entered the bedroom to find Sophie propped up against the pillows, exhausted and sweaty and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket, and as Hank approached, she pulled back the edge to reveal a tiny red face and a shock of dark hair. "Meet your son," Sophie said, her voice hoarse but filled with love. "What should we name him?" Hank sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out with one finger to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. The infant's fingers curled around his, and Hank felt tears running down his face. "Henry," he said without hesitation, "after my father, if that is all right with you." "Henry Kincaid," Sophie said, testing the name. "It is perfect. Hello, Henry. Welcome to the world, little one." They sat together, the three of them, as the morning light filled the room. Hannah peeked in briefly to congratulate them and coo over her new nephew before leaving them alone. Hank and Sophie marveled at the tiny person they had created, counting fingers and toes, wondering at the perfection of tiny ears and the delicate curve of eyelashes. "I love you," Hank said to Sophie, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," Sophie said, "and I love our son, our family, everything we have built together." The first months of Henry's life were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Sophie recovered slowly from the birth, and Hank insisted she rest as much as possible while he and Hannah took turns caring for the baby. Sophie chafed at being away from her work, but she also treasured the quiet moments nursing her son, watching his expressions change as he grew and developed. When she did return to her art, she found a new subject that fascinated her. She began documenting Henry's growth through drawings, capturing every stage of his development. She sketched him sleeping, feeding, eventually sitting up and crawling. She drew Hank holding his son, the mixture of pride and terror and overwhelming love on his face. She created a visual record of their new family that would become one of her most treasured projects. By Henry's first birthday in September of 1887, the ranch was thriving. Hank had expanded the herd with Sophie's blessing, using some of the money she had earned from her commissions to buy more breeding stock. They were becoming one of the most successful ranches in the territory, known for their quality cattle and their fair treatment of workers. Sophie's reputation as an artist had grown beyond Arizona. Some of her drawings had been published in Eastern magazines, showcasing life in the West to readers who had never been past the Mississippi. She received commissions from as far away as New York and Boston, though she was selective about which ones she accepted. Her priority was her family and documenting their life together, but she enjoyed the creative challenge of outside work. They had settled into a comfortable rhythm, balancing work and family and their relationship with each other. Hank still took time each day to talk with Sophie, to really connect with her the way they had done during their courtship. They still watched sunsets together from the porch. They still made each other laugh and held each other close at night. As Henry learned to walk and then to talk, filling the house with noise and energy, Sophie sometimes thought back to that day in Coolidge when she had stood on the corner trying to sell her drawings for bread. It felt like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. The desperate, starving girl she had been then seemed completely disconnected from the woman she was now, loved, secure, fulfilled. You ever miss it? Hank asked her one evening when they were alone, Henry asleep upstairs. The freedom you had before, when it was just you and your art and the open road. Not even a little bit, Sophie said honestly. I didn't have freedom then, Hank. I had uncertainty and fear and hunger. What I have now is real freedom, the freedom to create without worrying about where my next meal will come from. The freedom to love and be loved. The freedom to build a life instead of just surviving day to day. Good, Hank said, pulling her close. Because I plan to keep you here forever if you will let me. Forever sounds perfect, Sophie said, and she meant it with her whole heart. In the spring of 1888, Sophie discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because her body was stronger. She continued working throughout, documenting the changing seasons on the ranch and the growth of their family. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah after Sophie's mother, was born in December during a light snowfall. She came faster than Henry had, with less drama and complication. Hank was able to be in the room this time, holding Sophie's hand through the contractions and being the first to hold his daughter after she was born. She looks like you, he said, studying the baby's delicate features. She has your nose and your chin. She has your eyes, though, Sophie said, noting the color even in the newborn haze. Storm cloud gray, just like her father. Henry, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his new sister. He wanted to help with everything, bringing diapers and blankets, singing to her in his off-key toddler voice. Sophie drew them constantly, capturing the bond forming between her children, documenting these precious early days. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch continued to prosper. Henry grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the horses and followed his father around whenever possible. Sarah was quieter, more contemplative, and she showed an early interest in drawing, much to Sophie's delight. They gave her paper and pencils as soon as she was old enough to hold them, and she spent hours creating her own childish masterpieces. In 1891, when Henry was 5 and Sarah was 3, Sophie completed the final drawings for the ranch documentation project that Hank had originally commissioned. She had hundreds of pieces now, a comprehensive record of the ranch in all its aspects and all its seasons. She had captured buildings and landscapes, cattle and horses, people working and resting, the passage of time and the changing seasons. They held a small ceremony one evening, just the family and the ranch hands, to mark the completion of the project. Sophie had selected 50 of her best drawings and had them framed, hanging them throughout the ranch house. The rest were carefully preserved in portfolios, a historical record for future generations. "My father would have loved these," Hank said, standing before a drawing Sophie had done of the original cabin site. The tumbled stones and rotted wood transformed into something beautiful through her skilled hand. He would have been so proud to see his ranch documented like this, to know that his legacy would be preserved. "I hope I did it justice," Sophie said, slipping her arm around his waist. "You did more than that. You captured his dream and made it immortal. Thank you, Sophie. For everything." That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Hank and Sophie sat on the porch as they always did, watching the stars emerge. "You remember the day we met?" Hank asked. "When I came across you selling your drawings in Coolidge." "I remember every detail," Sophie said. "I was so hungry I could barely think straight, and I was terrified of what would happen to me. Then you appeared and bought all my drawings, and you gave me hope." "I took one look at your work and knew you were special," Hank said. "But I had no idea that buying those drawings would change my entire life. That the desperate young woman trying to sell her art for bread money would become my wife, the mother of my children, my best friend and partner in everything." "Did you ever imagine we would end up here?" Sophie asked. "With a family, with this life. Not in my wildest dreams," Hank admitted. "I had convinced myself I would be alone forever. And then you drew me on my horse, and you saw things in me I had not let anyone see in years, and I started to hope that maybe I could have more. That maybe I could have everything." "And do you have everything, I mean?" Hank pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I have more than everything. I have you, I have our children, I have this ranch my father built and a legacy to pass on to Henry and Sarah. I have work that matters and love that fills every corner of my life. What more could any man ask for?" They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Sophie spoke again. "You know, I still draw every day, not just the commissioned work or the family portraits. I draw us, this life we have built. I want to capture it all so that someday, when we are old and gray, we can look back and remember exactly how it felt to be this happy. We will still be this happy when we are old and gray," Hank said confidently. "This isn't the kind of happiness that fades with time. This is the kind that grows deeper, that becomes part of who you are." "I hope you are right," Sophie said. "I am always right," Hank teased, and Sophie laughed and swatted his arm, and they went inside still laughing, still in love, still grateful for the day a starving artist met a lonely rancher, and two broken pieces became a beautiful whole. The years continued to roll by, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Henry grew tall and strong, learning everything he could about ranching from his father. He had Hank's quiet strength and Sophie's ability to see beauty in the world around him. He was gentle with the horses and patient with the cattle, and everyone agreed he would make a fine rancher someday. Sarah remained quieter and more introspective, but she had a wicked sense of humor that surprised people. She drew constantly, filling book after book with sketches. Sophie taught her technique and theory, but she was careful not to push too hard, remembering how her own mother's disapproval had made her doubt herself. Instead, she encouraged Sarah to follow her own artistic vision, to draw what called to her rather than what others expected. In 1895, when Henry was 9 and Sarah was 7, they welcomed another child, a son they named James. He was a surprise, conceived when Sophie thought she was past the age of bearing more children, but a welcome one. James was a happy, easy baby who seemed to fit perfectly into their growing family. By this time, Sophie's reputation as an artist had grown considerably. Her work was featured in galleries back east, and she received more commissions than she could possibly accept. She was selective, choosing projects that interested her and turning down those that did not. She had the luxury of being able to do that now, thanks to the ranch's prosperity and Hank's unwavering support, but her favorite work remained the documentation of her own family and life. She had hundreds of drawings now, chronicling every stage of her children's growth, every season on the ranch, every important moment. She drew Hank aging gracefully, his dark hair showing threads of silver, his face gaining character with each passing year. She drew Hannah and Thomas and their growing family. She drew the ranch hands who came and went, preserving their faces and stories. In 1898, tragedy struck when Hannah became ill with pneumonia. Despite the doctor's best efforts, she passed away within a week, leaving Thomas devastated and their children motherless. It was the first major loss since Sophie had come to the ranch, and it hit everyone hard. Hank was particularly affected, losing the sister who had been his closest family for his entire life. Sophie held him as he wept, something she had never seen him do before, not even at moments of great joy. She did not try to offer empty platitudes or false comfort. She simply held him and let him grieve. In the months after Hannah's death, Thomas and his children moved into the main house. It was crowded with 3 adults and 6 children, but it felt right. Families should be together in times of grief, and slowly, the household found a new rhythm. Sophie and Thomas worked together to care for the children, and Hank made sure his brother-in-law knew he was not alone. Sophie drew Hannah from memory, creating a series of portraits that captured her kindness and her quick smile. She framed the best one and gave it to Thomas, who hung it in his room and looked at it every night before he went to sleep. It was not much comfort, but it was something, a way to keep Hannah's memory alive. The turn of the century in 1900 was marked with a quiet celebration at the ranch. The new century seemed full of promise and change. The Wild West of Sophie's youth was slowly being tamed, with more towns and more people and more civilization creeping across the landscape. The Arizona Territory was talking about statehood, though that would not come for more than a decade yet. Henry was 14 now, on the cusp of manhood. He worked alongside his father every day, learning the business of ranching. He had his father's seriousness and his mother's artistic eye, and he loved the land with a passion that promised he would care for it well when it became his. Sarah, at 12, was developing into a talented artist in her own right. Her style was different from Sophie's, more impressionistic and emotional, but equally valid. Sophie helped her prepare a portfolio, and they began submitting her work to magazines and exhibitions. To their delight, several pieces were accepted, and Sarah had her first professional sale at the age of 13. James was a happy 5-year-old, curious about everything and full of energy. He had both his parents wrapped around his finger, and his older siblings doted on him. He showed no particular interest in ranching or art, preferring instead to spend his time exploring the world around him, collecting rocks and insects and asking endless questions. Through it all, Sophie and Hank's love remained strong. They had been married for 14 years now, and they were still each other's best friends and closest confidants. They still watched sunsets together whenever possible. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They still made each other laugh and held each other close at night. One evening in the spring of 1901, they took a ride out to the rock outcropping where Hank had proposed. something they tried to do at least once a year. The cottonwoods were in full leaf, and the spring wildflowers carpeted the ground in purple and yellow. "Do you remember what you asked me that first time we came here?" Sophie said, settling onto the rocks beside Hank. "I asked what you saw when you looked at me," Hank said. "And you told me I was lonely and hiding my kindness behind sternness. You were right about everything. And now?" "What do you see when you look at me?" Sophie asked, turning the question back on him. Hank studied her face, taking his time. She was 41 now, with lines around her eyes and silver threads in her brown hair, but she was more beautiful to him than she had been at 22. "I see the woman who saved my life," he said finally. "Not literally, but in every way that matters. I see my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. I see an incredibly talented artist who could have had a career anywhere but chose to stay here with me. I see someone who is still curious and passionate and kind after everything life has thrown at us. I see the love of my life, and I fall more in love with you every single day." Sophie felt tears prick at her eyes. After all these years, he could still move her with his words. "I see the same when I look at you," she said. "The man who bought my drawings when I was starving, the rancher who gave me a home and a purpose, the husband who has supported every dream I have ever had, the father who loves our children with his whole heart. The man who taught me that love doesn't have to be painful, that it can be the best thing in your life if you are brave enough to let it in." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. They had seen hundreds of sunsets from this spot over the years, but somehow each one felt special, like a gift they were being given. "You ever think about that day in Coolidge?" Hank asked. "About how different your life would have been if I had not come along?" "Sometimes," Sophie admitted. "But I prefer to think about how lucky I was that you did. I could have ended up anywhere, doing anything. But instead, I ended up here with you, with this life. It is more than I ever dreamed of when I was standing on that street corner hoping to sell a drawing for bread money." "I was lucky too," Hank said. "I could have ridden past you that day. I could have ignored your drawings or bought just one and moved on. But something made me stop, made me really look at your work. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was just the right place at the right time. But whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." They rode back to the ranch in the gathering darkness, comfortable in each other's presence. When they arrived, the house was lit up from within, warm and welcoming. They could see their children through the windows, Henry helping James with something, Sarah drawing at the kitchen table, Thomas reading to his own children in the parlor. It was a scene of domestic contentment, hard-won and deeply cherished. As the years continued to pass, the ranch remained prosperous, and the family continued to grow. Henry eventually married a young woman from Coolidge, a schoolteacher named Mary, and they had children of their own. Sarah moved to San Francisco to pursue her art career, but came home often, and she always said the ranch was where her heart truly lived. James discovered a love of mechanics and engineering, fascinated by the automobiles and machinery that were beginning to appear even in rural Arizona. Sophie continued to draw and paint, documenting every stage of her family's evolution. She created a visual history that spanned decades, preserving moments both grand and small. Her work was exhibited in galleries across the country, and she was recognized as one of the finest artists working in the Western tradition. But none of that mattered as much to her as the life she had built with Hank. The ranch, the family, the love that had sustained them through joy and sorrow, triumph and loss. She had started with nothing, selling her drawings for bread on a dusty street corner, and she had ended up with everything. In 1915, on their 30th wedding anniversary, Sophie and Hank hosted a celebration at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren were there, along with friends and neighbors from miles around. Thomas made a toast, remembering Hannah and all she had meant to the family. Henry spoke about inheriting not just land but a legacy of love and hard work. Sarah presented her parents with a portrait she had painted of them, capturing them as they were now, aged and weathered but still clearly devoted to each other. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Sophie and Hank found themselves alone on the porch once again, as they had been so many times over the years. 30 years, Hank said, shaking his head in wonder. It hardly seems possible. I feel like I just met you yesterday. 30 years of waking up next to you, Sophie said. 30 years of sunsets and conversations and building this life together. I would not trade a single day of it, not even the hard days, Hank asked. The losses, the struggles, not even those, Sophie said firmly. Because we faced them together and they made us stronger. They made our love deeper. I understand now what you meant all those years ago when you said love was worth the risk of pain. Because yes, love can hurt, but it also heals, it sustains, it gives meaning to everything else. Without love, without you, I would have had a life, but it would not have been this life. It would not have been a life worth documenting in hundreds of drawings. Hank took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. I am so glad I stopped that day in Coolidge, he said. So glad I looked at your drawings instead of riding past. So glad I was brave enough to tell you how I felt, even though I was terrified. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sophie Kimball, you and our life together. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Sophie said. The rancher who bought all my drawings and commissioned me forever. You gave me a home and a family and a love I will treasure until my last breath. They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other when they both needed it most. The desperate artist and the lonely rancher, brought together by fate or luck, or the simple intersection of need and opportunity. They had built something beautiful together, something that would outlast them both in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that would be passed down through generations, in the hundreds of drawings that preserved their life and their love for all time. As Sophie rested her head on Hank's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, she thought about that girl she had been 30 years ago, standing on a street corner with nothing but her drawings and her determination. If she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, what wonders and joys and love awaited her, would that girl even believe it? Probably not. Some things were too good to believe until you lived them. But Sophie had lived them, was still living them, and she intended to treasure every remaining moment. Because this was what it meant to be truly wealthy. Not money in the bank or fame or recognition, but love shared and family cherished and a life built together one day at a time. The years rolled on, and Sophie and Hank grew older together, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They watched their children build their own lives and families. They welcomed new grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. They saw the Arizona Territory become the state of Arizona in 1912. They witnessed the automobile replace the horse, electricity come to the ranch, the world change in ways both wonderful and terrible. Through it all, they remained each other's constant. Sophie still drew, though arthritis made it more difficult as the years passed. Hank still ran the ranch with Henry's increasing help, though he moved more slowly now, his body bearing the weight of decades of hard work. In the summer of 1920, when they were both in their 60s, they made one final trip to the rock outcropping where so much of their story had unfolded. It took longer than it used to, and they had to stop to rest more frequently, but they made it. They sat on the rocks where they had shared lunch that first time, where Hank had asked what she saw when she looked at him, where he had proposed, where they had marked anniversaries and milestones throughout their marriage. "I want to be buried here," Hank said suddenly. "When my time comes, I want my ashes scattered in this place. It is where I realized I loved you. It is where we began our life together. It feels right." "Me too," Sophie said, squeezing his hand. "This is our place. It should be our final resting place as well." They sat together as the sun set one more time, painting the sky in familiar glory. And Sophie thought about all the drawings she had made over the years, all the moments she had captured and preserved. She had documented a life, a family, a love story that had begun with nothing and become everything. Years later, when they were both gone, their children and grandchildren would look at those drawings and see the full arc of their story. They would see the ranch in all its glory, the family in all its generations, and most of all, they would see the love between Sophie and Hank, captured in countless sketches and studies and finished pieces. They would see how two lonely people found each other and built something that lasted not just their lifetimes but beyond, creating a legacy that would endure for generations. But that was still in the future. For now, on this perfect evening in 1920, Sophie and Hank simply sat together, holding hands and watching the sunset, grateful for every day they had been given, for the chance meeting that had changed both their lives, for the love that had sustained them through everything. Sophie had sold her drawings for bread, and the rancher had bought them all and commissioned her forever. But in the end, it was not about the drawings or the commission or even the ranch. It was about two souls finding each other in the wilderness, choosing love over fear, building a life together one moment at a time, and creating something beautiful that would outlast them both.